If you've seen enough of my reviews, you may have noticed that I really enjoy platformers. As I grew up with an N64, 3D platforms were all that I played, from the classics such as Super Mario 64 to other titles such as Mystical Ninja and A Bug's Life. With these reviews, it gives me an excuse to play 3D platformers that I never got a chance to check out. So for this video I'll be reviewing Kaya Dark Lineage for the PS2, a game that I had never heard of until it was suggested to me on YouTube through a comment by James Schultz. After looking into the game's history, it's easy to see why I never heard of it. The game was published by Atari, who are no longer relevant during the PS2 era. The game was developed by Eden Games, who I'd never heard of, but apparently they're a French developer who made the V-Rally series. They also developed the Alone in the Dark reboot, so you won't be too surprised that the company now only exists as a shell and haven't made a game in 4 years. I had no expectations going into this game, so let's take a look and see if it's worth checking out. Kaya Dark Lineage starts off with a girl called Kaya finding her stepbrother messing around with their father's equipment. Something goes wrong and they are both sucked into a portal that takes them into a magical world. Kaya wakes up to find herself surrounded by a race of talking creatures called the natives. Before she can figure out what's happened, creatures called the Wolfens start chasing her and the natives down. This is when you start playing, being chased by a large ship with wolf creatures shooting at you. In this opening chase you are thrown into almost every gameplay style that the game offers. You start off by doing some basic platforming, which if you're too slow at, you'll be killed by the Wolfens. You then have to avoid more Wolfens before sliding on a board, and then you have to use the floating and diving mechanics. After that, you're then shown how every Wolfen is a major threat, you can still take them down by using traps in your environment. This opening sequence is about 15 minutes long, but it quickly prepares you for everything you will encounter in the game. By initially putting you under pressure at the very start, you have to just go, and you end up learning by doing. That's not to say there aren't tutorial boxes or instructions in the game, but by having a fast-paced opening that jumps between different gameplay styles, you get a good feel of the game right off the bat, without it having to break down every aspect of the game and forcing it down your throat. You eventually escape and arrive in the native city. It is explained that the Wolfen are actually former natives who were transformed into Wolfens by the evil ruler Brazil. Brazil has also captured Kaya's brother, so she decides to help the natives in stopping him. At this point you properly begin your adventure, which has you travelling to different floating islands in the world. It's a pretty nice looking game. It hasn't aged perfectly, but there's a good range of environments here. What separates this world from other worlds in games is that everything is connected with wind currents. All the islands are floating on wind currents, there are currents throughout levels that can be used to gain height or act as an obstacle, and there are the wind tunnels, which is a shortcut system that can be used to revisit parts of the world. The specific locations and visuals don't stand out by themselves, but it's still a cool world to explore. The structure of the game has you play through one of several different islands to reach your objective on a map. At the beginning you will naturally be led to where you need to go, but the more you play the more the world opens up. For the sake of progressing in the story you'll have to go in one direction, but the game allows you to explore as much as you want. This is something I found myself naturally doing when playing. You have a map that will show you the right way to go, but I found it was more fun to just see where I would end up. As the game takes place on floating islands, there's no large areas, so there's no dead zones. What I mean by this is that everything has some sort of platforming obstacle or challenge, so even if you're heading in the wrong direction, it's not dull. The game pulls off being an open world platformer with its tight level design, which is something you don't see that often. There are a few reasons why simply exploring doesn't feel pointless and is just as fun as trying to head to the current objective. No matter where you go, you will always eventually come across one of the wind tunnels. So even if you're completely off track, you can jump in a wind tunnel and be right back on the correct path. With these tunnels you rarely have to fear backtracking, so you never have to worry how far you are from your destination. There is a large room with all the wind tunnels in Native City being the hub for the game. At any wind tunnel you encounter you can return to Native City to heal yourself, buy new items and play minigames. It's here where you can also purchase new abilities with money that you can find scattered in levels. None of the abilities are anything amazing. There's one that allows you to wall jump for example, but they do the job of adding to the gameplay gradually over time. To purchase certain upgrades you will need to rescue enough natives so they build more shops, and this brings me to another reason why the open world platforming works. After you defeat a Wolfen you can exercise him to turn him back into a native. Once you exercise a wolfen, they can never come back, so once you clear out an area of enemies and exercise them all, you can get past that area much quicker next time. To exercise a wolfen requires a certain number of magic orbs. You also need these magic orbs to heal yourself at any crystals you come across. You will only run into a limited number of orbs when playing a level, so you have to try and balance between healing yourself and exercising enemies. So no matter where you're headed to, you're always taking out wolfens and you're always making progress. There are certain upgrades that are essential for beating the game, and they can only be purchased after saving enough natives, so you'll likely find yourself having to go and seek out wolfens in unexplored areas at one point or the other. Usually having to grind enemies would be annoying, but that isn't the case here. This is due to all the points I've already mentioned. Every part of the map has its own obstacles, when you're exploring it helps find more wind tunnels, and you get to clear out areas permanently. I like the idea of exercising enemies, but it can still be irritating. If you don't have enough magic orbs, it means you have to return to that area after collecting more orbs and repeat fights that you've already done, which isn't too bad as you only need to do this if you want 100% completion. However, it's definitely annoying when you're fighting a wolfen and they accidentally fall off the side, so you can't exercise them at all without returning. This game classifies itself as an action-adventure game rather than a platformer, and that's because it has a combat system. When you're close to a wolfen, the camera will automatically lock onto them and your controls change, so you have a punch, kick and grab button. There is a lot to the combat. You gain additional combat abilities by buying the bracelets in Native City, and there are a number of different combos to use. Enemies will also react and change their tactics based off your attacks, so if you repeatedly punch, they will just block you. There are also different types of punches and kicks based off what direction you're pushing the analog stick at the time. The combat is filled with good intentions, but it still comes down to button mashing. I found that if I mostly kicked and pushed the analog stick in many different directions, every enemy will eventually open itself up and I would eventually win. It isn't mindless, and you still have to be wary about dodging attacks, especially when fighting a group of wolfens, but it's not a deep combat system that it tries so hard to be. The combat still serves its purpose well enough so it doesn't bring the game down, but it doesn't add much to the overall experience. There are numerous times when you encounter wolfens that have guns, so you can't take them head on. It's here where you have to use stealth to find a way of getting close enough to them to attack them, or finding something in the environment to take them out, such as a cannon or a bomb. At first I didn't enjoy the stealth. When you're spotted, the wolfens will start shooting at you and the bullets will push you backwards. This can lead to mixed results, where sometimes I could escape and hide no problem, but other times I would be shot off the edge or get stuck against something because the wolfen would keep on shooting me. Having stealth sections where the punishment for being spotted is inconsistent can make everything overly annoying. Saying that, the trick to all the stealth sections is to properly survey the area so you can take the correct route. The stealth only becomes bad if you don't take the time to find the right path. This may sound like an obvious statement for stealth in a game, but in a game of this style, I didn't expect that I would have to take the stealth too seriously at the start. With the different gameplay styles I mentioned earlier, riding on a board through tunnels, gliding, they all do their job well of adding variety. But there is something else about this game that stood out to me. It's very similar to Rayman 2: The Great Escape. There are gliding sections, some of the visuals such as the lava are almost the same, the wolfens use flying wooden ships like the space pirates, and both have themes of an evil force enslaving a world by kidnapping the inhabitants. It would be unfair to say that Kaya Dark Lineage is a rip-off, but in a way it plays like an alternative Rayman 3. It takes a similar approach to Rayman 2 with its setting and its world, but expands upon it. In Rayman 2 it felt like they did want to have an open world that felt connected, by making the player replay certain levels to find new alternative routes and to discover new levels. In Rayman Revolution they even added a large hub world to connect all the levels together. With Kaya Dark Lineage's open world design, it achieves this feeling much more effectively. I love Rayman 2, so I don't have a problem when a game is heavily inspired by it, but it's still a little bit too similar for its own good. As I'm getting to the end of the review, I do have two nitpicks that might be more than nitpicks for some people. The camera in general isn't too bad, but it can get stuck on the wall at times, and if you're near a wall the camera control is much more limited. The collision detection can also be a bit off at times, and it's possible to find yourself falling off the map. Still, the game is about 13 hours long, so there's definitely a lot here in terms of content. In some ways, Dark Lineage is a unique, interesting platformer, and in other ways it's just okay. The level design and open world creates a place that is fun to explore. It's also satisfying playing through the game with a clear sense of progression and variety. Saying that, the combat is only decent, and the similarities to Rayman 2 are too blatant to be ignored. Still, it's a game that I really enjoy playing through, so thanks for the recommendation, James. My score is 8.0 out of 10. This is a great platformer that is worth any platforming fan's time, despite its clear inspirations.